The most consequential front of the Cold War was not the fractured concrete of the Berlin Wall, nor the vast frozen expanse of the Siberian tundra, but an arena defined by crushing eternal darkness, the abyssal plains of the global ocean.
Here, in trenches deeper than any mountain is high, moved the silent, metallic hunters, the nuclear submarines, the ultimate instruments of immediate global warfare. They were forbidden patrols, missions run with nuclear reactors throbbing in their core and armed warheads nested in their tubes, navigating a submerged geopolitical chess game where a single miscalculation meant not only the loss of a vessel, but potentially the incineration of continents. This is the chronicle of 5 such vessels, 5 patrols that dissolved into the oceanic void, leaving behind only acoustic signatures, metallic wreckage, and secrets guarded by hydrostatic pressure. The men who sailed these boats knew they lived on a knife edge. 1,000 feet down, the pressure exerted on the hull approached 500 pounds per square inch. The environment inside the steel shell was a contradictory reality. Tightly controlled artificial atmosphere, the sterile hum of the reactor coolant pumps, the pervasive smell of ozone and hydraulic fluid, all superimposed upon the knowledge that outside, absolute cold and crushing force waited to exploit the tiniest flaw. When these vessels vanished, they did not simply sink, they were swallowed by a dimension that refused to yield its prisoners. The first, chilling loss that etched the true cost of nuclear sea power into the American consciousness was the sinking of the USS Thresher, SSN 593, in April 1963. The Thresher was not an outdated boat, but the vanguard of the fleet, the lead ship of her class, a swift, silent predator designed to hunt and kill Soviet ballistic missile submarines. She was state-of-the-art, utilizing high-tensile HY-80 steel, promising unprecedented operational depth. Yet, like many prototypes, she carried intrinsic, unseen flaws. On the morning of April 10th, the Thresher was engaged in deep-diving sea trials approximately 220 miles east of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, accompanied by the submarine rescue vessel USS Skylark. The Thresher carried 129 souls, her seasoned crew, and numerous shipyard personnel and technical observers, all there to witness the successful completion of the dive envelope certification. The weather above the surface was moderate, the Atlantic water a cool, dark slate. Down inside the Thresher, the atmosphere would have been tense but focused, every sound magnified in the steel framework, the steady vibration of machinery, the soft padding of rubber soles on deck plates, the hushed commands passed through the communication circuits. As she began her slow, cautious descent beneath the thermal layers, the boat entered a realm where external sound vanished, leaving only the internal rhythm of the vessel. The goal was to reach the deep test depth, a number whispered in hushed tones, representing the theoretical limit of the hull's endurance. Contact with the Skylark was maintained through underwater telephone, a frustratingly unreliable, crackling method of communication. The standard procedure for deep dives involved frequent, concise reports. At 0913, the Thresher radioed a garbled message regarding minor difficulties. The acoustic operator on the Skylark struggled to parse the transmission. There was reference to a positive angle, meaning the crew was attempting to surface, and an indication that the crew was trying to blow the main ballast tanks, a procedure involving forcing highly compressed air into the tanks to displace water and gain buoyancy. Then, silence. The Skylark tried desperately to raise the sub. They transmitted queries, waited, and transmitted again. The clock ticked on. The sun climbed higher above the rolling waves, mocking the desperate situation unfolding in the blackness, thousands of feet below. A little over an hour later, the Skylark's sophisticated hydrophones registered an undeniable, horrifying acoustic event. It was not a prolonged crunch or a gradual collapsing groan. It was a single, colossal, shattering sound wave, a massive detonation, generated not by explosives, but by implosion. The immense weight of the ocean, having found a structural weakness, had instantaneously pulverized the pressure hull. The high tensile steel, designed to withstand the deep, had failed in microseconds, converting 129 lives and thousands of tons of complex machinery into scattered debris fields spread across the continental shelf. Naval engineers later determined the likely chain of events. The root cause was identified as a critical failure in the silver-brazed joints of the internal piping, particularly in the engine room. As the thresher approached its maximum depth, one of these joints likely gave way, unleashing a high-pressure jet of seawater into the compartment, causing immediate electrical short circuits and a massive steam alarm. The control room crew, reacting instantly, attempted the emergency blow, but another fatal design flaw emerged. The high-pressure air lines passed through the ballast tanks themselves. The rapid expansion of air inside the pipes caused severe cooling, condensing ambient moisture into ice crystals that clogged the small orifice filters of the blow system. The emergency effort failed. The ballast tanks refused to empty, and the submarine continued its deadly descent, already crippled and flooding, until the pressure hull yielded. The sinking of the Thresher was a searing indictment of the early nuclear fleet's design and quality control. It forced the implementation of the SubSafe program, a rigorous, almost paranoid level of material and procedural inspection that fundamentally changed how American submarines were built and maintained. But for the 129 men, there was only the metallic silence of the Gulf of Maine seabed, where the wreckage remains, a scattered monument to the initial hubris of deep-sea nuclear technology. 5 years later, 1968 became the year the deep ocean consumed the rival superpowers simultaneously. The maritime mystery of that year was doubled, a catastrophic, unacknowledged ledger balancing the cost of submerged readiness between NATO and the Soviet bloc. The first vessel lost that spring was the Soviet Gulf II-class ballistic missile submarine, K-129. Unlike the sleek, nuclear-powered Thresher, the K-129 was a diesel-electric boat, older, smellier, and far more cramped, yet adapted to carry 3 R-13 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles. Her patrol in March 1968 was a strategic deterrent mission in the central North Pacific, patrolling within striking distance of the U.S. West Coast. The K-129 was a brutal assignment. Life below was relentless. The atmosphere was thick with diesel fumes during snorkel operations, interspersed with the stale, recirculated air typical of non-nuclear boats. The crew, under rigid Soviet naval discipline, endured weeks of suffocating confinement, navigating the immense, empty expanse of the ocean. She sailed from Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, vanishing without trace or distress signal soon after crossing the international dateline. Officially, the USSR launched an extensive, highly secretive surface search effort, using dozens of ships, scanning the waves for debris. They found nothing. The Soviet narrative, both internal and external, was one of official silence, a complete denial of the vessel's existence or loss. The true chronicle of the K-129's fate was written not by Moscow, but by the sensitive array of the U.S. Navy's SOSUS, sound surveillance system, hydrophones, laid secretly across the ocean floor. The Americans, listening intently to the symphony of the deep, recorded a precise, powerful acoustic event far north of the K-129's expected position. Analysis of the sound signature, a distinct, violent explosion, followed by a series of smaller impacts, allowed the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence to triangulate a location approximately 1,560 nautical miles northwest of Pearl Harbor, resting at an unimaginable depth of 16,000 feet. The K-129 lay far deeper than the Thresher, far deeper than any previous submarine loss. Crucially, she carried nuclear warheads. The potential intelligence coup, Retrieving an entire Soviet strategic missile and encryption systems was irresistible.
This realization sparked one of the most audacious and profoundly concealed operations of the entire Cold War, Project Azorian.
The CIA, under the guise of deep-sea manganese nodule mining, commissioned the construction of the Hughes Glomar Explorer, a colossal, purpose-built deep-sea salvage vessel. The Glomar was a masterpiece of disguise, featuring an immense central well, or moon pool, through which a specially designed mechanical claw, nicknamed Clementine, could be lowered on articulated pipe strings, mile after agonizing mile, into the abyss. Imagine the atmosphere during the recovery attempt in the summer of 1974. The Glomar sat stationary above the target area, disguised under the hot, indifferent Pacific sun. Below, in the black, pressurized void, Clementine, a massive skeletal arm, settled onto the mud near the crushed hull of the K-129. The operation was slow, fraught with the risk of failure due to the sheer distance and pressure. The retrieval succeeded only partially. The forward third of the submarine, containing some vital equipment and the bodies of 6 crewmen, was successfully hauled up through the 16,000-foot column of water, shattering the secrecy only when details leaked to the press later. The wreckage retrieved confirmed the violence of the K-129's end. Theories abound. Was it a torpedo explosion within the tubes? Did a structural failure cause a catastrophic flood that mixed with battery acid, generating hydrogen and triggering an explosion? Or, the most volatile possibility, was the loss the result of a collision with an undetected U.S. submarine shadowing the Soviet boat? Regardless of the cause, the K-129 was reduced to a radioactive ghost, its secret payload resting in pieces on the bottom of the deep Pacific, forever cementing the deadly, submerged stakes of the nuclear chess game. Parallel to the K-129 tragedy, and only 2 months later, NATO suffered an equally profound and still mysterious loss, the USS Scorpion, SSN 589. The Scorpion, a skipjack-class nuclear fast attack submarine, was returning to Norfolk, Virginia from a routine deployment in the Mediterranean, a long, wearying voyage home. By May 1968, the Scorpion was known to be a troubled boat. She had a history of hydraulic leaks, noise issues, and maintenance problems. The crew was undoubtedly exhausted from the long deployment. Aboard, the smell of burnt oil and stale coffee would have been persistent, mixed with the damp, metallic tang of seawater that constantly threatened to seep through faulty seals. The fatigue of the crew was often mirrored in the mechanical weariness of the boat itself. Her last communication was near the Azores, reporting her position and estimated arrival date. Then, like the Thresher and the K-129 before her, the Scorpion dissolved into absolute silence in the mid-Atlantic, somewhere southwest of the Azores archipelago. On June 5th, she was officially declared overdue. The immediate search effort focused on the possibility of a surface rescue, a faint hope that she was merely disabled. But the ocean, as always, had already claimed its due. The search eventually pivoted to the acoustic data, relying again on the global SOSUS network. Analysis of the sound profile was excruciatingly difficult. They located a clear sequence of events. First, an initial loud noise that suggested either a rapid flooding or an internal explosion. Second, a protracted, agonizing period of descent. And finally, the colossal terminal implosion sound, registered at a depth far exceeding the Scorpion's operational limits, suggesting she had broken up somewhere near 11,000 feet. The U.S. Navy launched an intense deep-sea hunt. In October 1968, the deep-sea research vessel Mizar finally located the scattered wreckage of the Scorpion on the abyssal plain. The debris field showed the bow section violently separated and bent back, suggesting an incredibly high-speed impact or a massive internal force had torn the vessel apart. The majority of the hull was twisted and severely mangled, confirming the massive pressures involved in the final implosion. The exact cause of the Scorpion's loss remains one of the Cold War's most fiercely debated naval mysteries. The official 1970 Court of Inquiry reached an open verdict. The cause of the sinking cannot be determined.
However, the prevailing theory centers around a hot-running torpedo. The Mark 37 torpedoes carried by the Scorpion used silver-zinc batteries prone to chemical instability.
A malfunction, perhaps a battery short circuit, could have caused the torpedo to overheat and accidentally arm itself, or even detonate in the tube. Imagine the scene, the frantic alarm, the control room desperately trying to launch or neutralize the overheating weapon, the sudden, violent rupture of the tube or the torpedo's own warhead, creating an instant breach in the forward pressure hull.
Another strong theory posits failure stemming from the boat's notorious mechanical condition, perhaps the accidental opening of a malfunctioning trash disposal unit.
Or a catastrophic hydraulic leak that, combined with the electrical demands of the propulsion system, caused the boat to lose control and spiral down to crush depth. Whatever the initial fault, the end was the same: a swift, brutal descent into the black void, sealing 99 men inside a radioactive sarcophagus, carrying its full nuclear payload into the ocean floor mud. The Scorpion lies roughly 400 miles southwest of the Azores, guarded by the deep ocean currents and the burden of undispelled uncertainty.
2 years later, the Soviet Navy was hit again, this time by a fire that metastasized into a complete disaster. The K-8, a November-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, was a first-generation boat, bulky, notoriously loud, and inherently unstable.
In April 1970, the K-8 was participating in the large-scale Soviet naval exercise known as Okean 70, a massive global show of force. On April 8th, while operating deep in the Bay of Biscay, approximately 300 miles west of Spain, tragedy struck. The initial alarm was raised late in the evening. A serious fire broke out simultaneously in 2 widely separated compartments, the 3rd, central post, and the 8th, aft machinery, likely due to a crossed wire or severe electrical fault within the complex, aging wiring harnesses. Inside the K-8, the situation instantly became hellish. Fire aboard a submarine is the most terrifying scenario. The space is confined, the escape routes limited, and the air supply finite. The atmosphere would have been immediately choked by thick, acrid black smoke, burning insulation, melting plastic, and boiling lubricants. The heat rapidly became unbearable, radiating through the bulkheads. The Soviet crew, driven by fierce internal discipline, fought the blaze with immense bravery, but ultimately inadequate equipment. Firefighting meant sealing compartments and pumping in freon gas, a suppressant that also created toxic fumes. Several sailors quickly succumbed to smoke inhalation. The fire was so intense that some reports indicate the reactor containment dome was compromised by the heat. For a period, the crew managed to stabilize the situation. They surfaced the damaged, smoke-filled submarine in the raging, turbulent North Atlantic. Imagine the contrast. The surface, a chaotic, thrashing expanse of mountainous waves driven by a severe gale, contrasted with the silent, creeping terror of compromised machinery below the waterline. The K-8 remained afloat for over 2 days while attempting to wait for rescue or be taken under tow. Most of the crew, suffering from severe burns and smoke poisoning, were evacuated onto a small, inadequate Soviet surface vessel. But 52 men remained aboard the crippled sub, struggling to maintain buoyancy and control the compromised reactor. The brutal reality of the North Atlantic storm proved the ultimate executioner. The tow lines snapped repeatedly in the churning seas. With the hull heavily damaged by fire and internal systems failing, water began to inundate the submarine in the heavy swells. On April 12th, the K-8 lost stability.
The remaining crew fought desperately against the list and the rising water, but the ship's structure was too compromised. With an uncontrolled, rapid descent, the K-8 plunged into the Bay of Biscay.
45 men, having survived the fire, perished in the rapid sinking, sealed into the metal coffin thousands of feet down.
The K-8 carried 2 nuclear reactors and 4 nuclear torpedoes, a radioactive package now settled on the seabed, a permanent legacy of the Soviet fleet's operational risks. The K-8 confirmed that the danger was not always external, not always a sudden implosion, but often the internal, raging entropy of complex machinery pushed past its breaking point. The final, horrifying chapter in this chronicle of forbidden disappearances belongs to the Yankee-class ballistic missile submarine, K-219, in October 1986. This incident represents the Cold War at its twilight, operating under the doctrines of mutually assured destruction, and it was perhaps the closest the world came to an accidental thermonuclear catastrophe. The K-219, a massive strategic deterrent vessel designed to carry 16 SSN-6 liquid-fueled nuclear missiles, was on patrol in the infamous Devil's Triangle region of the Atlantic, roughly 680 miles northeast of Bermuda. This was a critical operational zone, allowing Soviet missiles to hit targets across the eastern seaboard of the United States. Life aboard the Yankee-class boat was a constant state of hyper-alertness. The core mission was deterrence, but the liquid-fueled missiles themselves were a perpetual danger. The propellants used highly volatile, corrosive, and toxic oxidizers. On the morning of October 3rd, the routine of the patrol was shattered by a massive, jarring internal explosion. A leak in a seal of one of the forward torpedo tubes allowed high-pressure seawater to ingress. The saltwater reacted violently with residual rocket propellant, likely nitrogen tetroxide, within the launch silo of a missile, causing a cascade failure. The explosion in the missile compartment, Compartment 4, was followed immediately by a fierce fire and the release of highly toxic gases, a burning mix of chemicals and combustion products that smelled metallic and intensely irritating. The structural integrity of the hull was severely breached. Despite heroic efforts by the crew, the fire raged, the temperatures spiking high enough to threaten the integrity of the missile tubes themselves. If the fire had spread uncontrollably, it could have triggered the low-yield conventional explosives in the warheads, scattering the plutonium pits across the Atlantic, a geopolitical and environmental disaster of epic proportions. Under Captain Igor Britanov, the crew fought relentlessly for over 3 days, battling fire, toxic fumes, and immense psychological pressure. The submarine was brought to the surface, listing dangerously, its missile tubes venting noxious gas into the cool Atlantic air. The critical danger lay in the dual nuclear reactors in the aft section. With control over the stern jeopardized, the crew struggled to manually insert the emergency scram rods to shut down the reactors completely. This required entering an area already saturated with lethal radiation. This is where Petty Officer 3rd Class Sergei Preminin, a 20-year-old reactor control specialist, entered the pantheon of naval heroes. Preminin volunteered to enter the contaminated compartment 3 times. On his final entry, alone in the blinding, stifling heat and the overwhelming radiation field, he succeeded in manually lowering the control rods, stabilizing the reactor, and preventing a catastrophic meltdown. By the time he completed the procedure, the intense heat and radiation had sealed the hatch above him. His sacrifice, though unacknowledged by the West for years, prevented a disaster of potentially global scale. Preminin later received the posthumous honor of Hero of the Russian Federation. Despite the temporary stabilization, the K-219 was doomed. The Soviet salvage effort was disorganized and insufficient. As the tugboats attempted to tow the crippled vessel, the hull continued to flood. On October 6th, Captain Britanov reluctantly ordered the crew to abandon ship. As the last men transferred, the K-219 buckled. The massive Yankee-class boat, a titanium sarcophagus of 16 nuclear weapons and 2 reactors, plunged stern first, spiraling down miles into the deep abyssal plain off the coast of Bermuda.
It was a visible, horrifying confirmation of the perilous nature of constant nuclear readiness. The 5 disappearances, Thresher, K-129, Scorpion, K-8, and K-219, are not merely maritime statistics. They are milestones in the history of existential risk.
They represent hundreds of lives lost and the permanent entombment of high-level radioactive waste scattered across the deepest parts of the global ocean, from the New England continental shelf to the remote Central Pacific and the Bay of Biscay.
The sensory details of these disasters underscore the terrifying reality of deep-sea warfare. For the crews of the Thresher and the Scorpion, the final moment was likely instantaneous, an overwhelming, crushing noise preceding oblivion, the high tensile steel yielding not with a tear, but with a shockwave felt thousands of miles away.
The colossal canyon face drops into absolute darkness, an eternity of freezing pressure and oppressive scale. Faint, alien bioluminescence traces the cold geometry of the abyss. For the Soviet crews of the K-8 and the K-219, the end was protracted agony. The smell of burning metal and freon gas, the choking smoke, the agonizing heat radiating through the bulkheads, the terrifying sound of the sea rushing into breaches, a hissing, unstoppable force consuming the vital machinery.
The experience was one of fighting a battle simultaneously against fire, toxic atmosphere, and the unrelenting force of gravity pulling the compromised hull down. These forbidden patrols were the essential shadow missions of the Cold War. They existed outside the public eye, their disappearance shrouded in immediate and dense layers of classification, cover-up, and geopolitical misdirection.
The U.S. meticulously concealed the discovery and attempted recovery of the K-129. The Soviets offered nothing but stone-faced silence regarding the K-8 and the K-219 until decades later.
The truth became a forensic puzzle pieced together from heavily redacted archival documents, acoustic data intercepts, and the slow, arduous work of deep-sea photography and salvage.
Today, these 5 hulls rest thousands of feet beneath the surface, metallic ghosts in the radioactive trenches. They are silent witnesses to a geopolitical conflict whose full environmental and human cost is still being measured.
Reminders that the ultimate instruments of deterrence carried the inherent risk of internal, catastrophic self-destruction, far away from any enemy's attack, swallowed by the ocean they sought to command. The deep guards these secrets, cold, dark, and utterly unforgiving.